In a bold move against the Trump administration, 19 states have joined forces to file a lawsuit. At the heart of this legal battle is a contentious issue: the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in schools. The Trump administration, in a controversial directive, threatened to withhold federal education funding from states that don't comply with their interpretation of a 2023 Supreme Court ruling on race-based decisions in education. This lawsuit marks a significant escalation in the ongoing battle over the role of DEI in education, with billions of dollars in funding hanging in the balance. The 19 states involved in the lawsuit represent a diverse cross-section of the country, from California to New York to Illinois. Led by New York Attorney General Letitia James, these states argue that the Trump administration's directive is unconstitutional and unlawful. They claim that the administration's vague definition of illegal DI creates confusion and could force states to dismantle perfectly legal and beneficial initiatives. This lawsuit is about more than just money. It's about fundamental principles of fairness and equality. The outcome of this legal challenge could have far-reaching consequences for the educational opportunities of millions of students across the country. It raises important questions about the role of the federal government in dictating state education policy and the limits of executive power. The Trump administration's directive, issued in February 2025, sent shockwaves through the education system. Citing a 2023 Supreme Court ruling that prohibited race-based decisions in college admissions, the administration argued that this principle should extend to all aspects of education, including K-12 schools. The directive requires states to certify their compliance with this interpretation of the ruling or risk losing billions of dollars in federal education funding. Critics argue that the administration is misinterpreting and overreaching in its application of the Supreme Court ruling. They contend that the ruling specifically addressed college admissions and should not be used to dismantle DEI programs in K-12 schools. These critics, including many legal scholars and civil rights organizations, point out that the directive lacks legal standing and sets a dangerous precedent for federal overreach into state education matters. The administration, however, remains steadfast in its position. They argue that federal funding is a privilege, not a right, and that states accepting these funds must adhere to federal anti-discrimination requirements. They maintain that their directive is necessary to ensure that no student is discriminated against or given preferential treatment based on their race. The directive has ignited a firestorm of controversy, with educators, policymakers, and parents across the country grappling with its implications. It has become a flashpoint in the ongoing national debate over race, equality, and the role of education in society. The financial stakes of this lawsuit are enormous. The 19 states involved stand to lose a combined total of over $18.7 billion in federal education funding if they fail to comply with the Trump administration's directive. This funding is crucial for supporting a wide range of educational programs, including those serving low-income students, students with disabilities, and English language learners. California, the most populous state in the nation, stands to lose the most, with approximately $8 billion in annual federal education funding at risk. These funds are essential for supporting the state's large and diverse student population, particularly its low-income and special education programs. New York faces a similar predicament with over $3 billion in annual funding on the line, half of which is earmarked for low-income students. The potential loss of this funding would be devastating for these states, forcing them to make difficult choices about which programs to cut and how to meet the needs of their most vulnerable students. It could lead to larger class sizes, fewer resources for students with disabilities, and a decline in the quality of education overall. The Trump administration's directive has placed these states in an impossible position, forcing them to choose between upholding their commitment to DEI and securing vital funding for their schools. This funding standoff has real-world consequences for millions of students and educators across the country. Section 4, a war of words, State Attorneys General versus the Trump administration. The lawsuit filed by the 19 states has ignited a war of words between State Attorneys General and the Trump administration. State Attorneys General have come out swinging, accusing the administration of playing politics with education funding and jeopardizing the future of millions of students. California Attorney General Rob Bonta called the administration's rationale for the directive illogical and a thinly veiled attempt to score political points. New York Attorney General Letitia James echoed these sentiments, vowing to fight tooth and nail to protect New York schools and students from the Trump administration's attacks. Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul accused the administration of pushing an anti-DEI agenda at the expense of vulnerable children. The Trump administration, for its part, has remained defiant. Acting Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights Craig Traynor defended the administration's authority to set conditions for receiving federal funds, arguing that states have an obligation to comply with federal anti-discrimination laws. Traynor maintained that the directive is necessary to ensure that taxpayer dollars are not used to fund discriminatory practices in schools. This war of words highlights the deep ideological divide between the two sides of this debate. At its core, it is a battle over the meaning of equality, the role of government in education, and the future of American society. Section 5. Early victories. Judges put the brakes on Trump's directive. In a series of early legal victories for the 19 states challenging the Trump administration's directive, federal judges have temporarily blocked its implementation. These rulings, while preliminary, provide a glimmer of hope for advocates of DEI programs and underscore the serious legal questions surrounding the administration's actions. One judge, in a scathing rebuke of the administration's directive, criticized its vague guidance and warned of potential violations of teachers' First Amendment rights. The judge questioned the administration's broad interpretation of the 2023 Supreme Court ruling and expressed skepticism about its applicability to K-12 schools. Another judge, citing procedural irregularities and constitutional concerns, ruled that the directive had been improperly issued and lacked proper justification. These early legal setbacks for the Trump administration suggest that its attempt to defund schools over DEI programs faces an uphill battle in court. The rulings highlight the weakness of the administration's legal arguments and bolster the case of the 19 states challenging the directive. While these rulings are not final, they provide a much-needed boost to those fighting to preserve DEI initiatives in schools across the country. Section 6. The bigger picture. DEI under fire in the Trump era. The Trump administration's directive targeting DEI programs in schools is part of a broader pattern of attacks on DEI initiatives across various sectors of society. From higher education to corporate America, the administration has consistently sought to undermine and dismantle efforts to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. This assault on DEI is rooted in a deeply conservative ideology that views such efforts as discriminatory, divisive, and antithetical to American values. Proponents of this view argue that DEI programs amount to reverse discrimination, unfairly benefiting certain groups at the expense of others. They contend that such programs foster a culture of victimhood and resentment, undermining individual merit and national unity. This perspective, however, ignores the systemic inequalities and historical injustices that necessitate DEI initiatives. Decades of discrimination based on race, gender, sexual orientation, and other identities have created deep disparities in access to opportunity and resources. DEI programs are essential for addressing these disparities and creating a more just and equitable society for all.